So the one or the mind that was in Jesus, what? That mind is in me? You'll have to decide that for yourself. I must admit that I am here again.
That I am here again.
Jesus, tournament, final four, championship, 64 Jesuses in a bracket, just like March Madness, but not it. Who is the ultimate Jesus besides the original Jesus? That is what we are here to find out. Thanks for watching. Today's the day we'll finally get our answer. We are here in the land of the free, the home of the brave, in the final installment of the Jesus versus Jesus tournament. But first, I have to take a moment to acknowledge 3 Jesuses who did not make it to today's matchups. Jim Jones, I'm glad I don't have to talk about you today. You are the worst. Jesus of Kitway, you might be too good for this world, but you might also be, probably are, a little crazy. And Noah Cash, I'm just gonna let you speak for yourself.
I'm always peaceful. I have nothing but peace.
Relax, brother.
I died for you.
Relax.
My father put me on a cross, crucified me, literally crucified me so that you guys could be saved.
Yeah.
And now you're attacking his only son.
Yeah.
Godspeed, Noah. And that brings us finally to the tournament, so let's get into this. And if you do not know where we left off, the last 4 videos, Division 1 through 4, are available on the channel page. And so if you're just joining us, you can watch those videos and get all caught up. But where we left off is at some difficult matchups here, beginning with Marshall Applewhite and David Koresh. And then that is going to lead into the Sweet 16. And we have Moon and Inri in the Sweet 16 waiting for whoever comes out of these matchups. And the next one is going to be Charles Manson and Shoko Asahara. So let's switch right into the profiles. And let's get this tournament going. Welcome to the finals. And our first contender here is Marshall Applewhite of the Heaven's Gate Cult, aka Doe, aka Bo. Born May 17th, 1931, died March 26, 1997, age 65, along with 38 other fellow cult followers.
We'll title this tape Planet Earth About to be Recycled. Your only chance to evacuate is to leave with us.
So if you look down here, what I've done, basically we have 9 left in the tournament, and so I just took, based on these categories, and ranked them, and that adds up to their final score here, as you can see. And obviously some of these are going to tie in or correlate to some of these others, like size and influence are going to be related, as well as recruiting. But I think the total in the end gives a good visual of the ranking based on these criteria. So let's get into this, and we'll kind of look at these categories, and it's not all going to be based on just numbers. Obviously the size will be, but as you can see, there's kind of a gray area here. So the size of the cult at the end is kind of disputed. Some say, so there was 39 that died in the house, 1 or one survivor, by one account, and then 2 others committed suicide in solidarity. So 41 total deaths, 39 in the house, and then by one account there's 1 survivor, so that would put it at 42. Some accounts they say 50. Over the lifetime of his career, anywhere from 100 to 1,000 I saw in one story. And next, let's get into longevity. So Marshall Applewhite began in the early 70s with his partner Bonnie Nettles, who he met in a psychiatric institution, renamed themselves Bo and Peep. They took a 6-month-long road trip across the United States and started recruiting members, began calling themselves the Crew in 74. I gave them a score of 4 because I think, they're on, and as you can see on most of these, they're kind of in the middle of the road, or middle of the rankings of the group. But they also do, they're still available on the internet, which I'll get into later in the influence. So they're not going to be the lowest, but they're also not near the top. In the recruiting category, they did, initially they did some aggressive recruiting. They targeted the poor, as you can see. They would go to less privileged areas, claiming the earth would one day be recycled, trying to convince them the only way to be saved was to give up all their possessions, which was obviously a little easier to convince people who didn't have a whole lot to give up their possessions and join a cult. So, that kind of hopefully gives you a little insight on the thinking there. Next category, entrapment. So they didn't score high on entrapment, obviously, because members of the cult were adults. They were there voluntarily. Reportedly, everything that they did was voluntarily. They rejected humanness, seeking to purify themselves through extreme dieting and sexual repression. The ultimate goal was to dehumanize themselves to achieve a higher state and go on to the next level, in quotes. Applewhite was reportedly caught having a sexual relationship with a man earlier in his life, which was obviously frowned upon, more so even then in the 70s. Moving on to influence. Like I said above, website is still maintained. Cult videos are widely circulated and available online. So, they're not the highest ranking on the influence list, but also not the lowest. Deadliness. 39 died in mass suicide. 2 other members committed suicide later in solidarity. As I said earlier, near 100% mortality rate of the final group. So they got a pretty high score on the deadliness, and that's just between the 9 in this group. I think I pointed out earlier, if I were to have included Jim Jones in this list, he obviously probably would. He would have been the heavy favorite in here, even among these 9, which are some of the worst of the worst. Last word. After the suicides, one of the discoverers of Hale Bopp, Alan Hale, gave a press conference. He said of the comet that Heaven's Gate had believed to be harboring a spaceship, "Tonight, forget about the world for a minute. Go outside, look up in the northwest and take a look at this comet. It's a beautiful object. It's lovely. It's one of the most magnificent celestial objects you will ever see. But for all its beauty, its magnificence, its splendor, all it is a dirty snowball that's orbiting the sun. Nothing more."
The promise was eternal life.
What about these people here?
Those people here are people, well, you know what they think of me? They think I'm the son of God.
Do they?
Yeah.
Is he the Son of God?
I hope he is.
I will declare the decree. The Lord has said unto me, Thou art my son. This day have I begotten thee. Someone's the Son of God.
And with that, I'm just going to move right on to David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. Born Vernon Wayne Howell in August 17th, 1959, died in the siege at Waco on April 19th, 1993, aged 33. And I'm just going to get right into these rankings because I think I've done enough talking setting up the format here. So as you can see, he's got a pretty high score here. Marshall Applewhite ended at 27 and he's at 39. So you can already see there's some separation even between these two guys at the beginning. And needless to say, that makes David Koresh the winner of our first matchup. But let's go through kind of the thought process behind his rankings. At the size ranking, he's number 5, approximately 125 at the peak. The longevity, I gave him a pretty high ranking because he does receive sympathy from some after the botched government siege. Even, the government's been accused of murder even by some members and in online comment sections. And if you look at these videos, you'll know what I mean. And links for these videos will be available in the video description. Some aggressive recruiting, international, went to Australia, UK, Israel, also to California, but obviously based in Texas. In the entrapment category, I gave him an 8, so that's the second highest score. There were repeated accusations against Koresh of statutory rape and spiritual marriages with underage women, claimed to have fathered children with several women in the group, some of them who were married already, with members who were in the compound. He said he had received a revelation from God telling him to father 24 children to serve as leaders once the rapture came. There were also claims that Koresh and other members of the group were physically abusing children. One incident involved the beating of Koresh's 3-year-old son, Cyrus. Meanwhile, Koresh and his followers had begun stockpiling weapons, forming an army of God to prepare for the apocalypse. Koresh claimed to have cracked the code of the book of Revelations and warned that the end times were near. Now, some will say that they were there voluntarily, which to a certain extent I think is true. But he just seems to have had such a tight hold on the group, and that's why I gave him such a high ranking on that one. Influence, I put about the middle of the pack. Critics of government use Waco as an example of overreach, incompetence, unaccountability, and religious persecution, as I said earlier or alluded to earlier. But overall, I don't think he deserves to be a highest ranking on the list. I'm not on this list. Deadliness, he's obviously in this group the highest ranking. 85 died in the government siege of the compound and near 100% mortality rate of the final group.
We also put to Koresh claims that he had sex with children and underage girls.
Did you do it?
No, I didn't do it. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. The guy's tough. He's got more than guns. He's got God.
I basically got hooked.
Bruce and Lisa Gent moved from Melbourne to join the cult. They left in disgust, but their twin children, Peter and Nicole, stayed on. Nicole had 2 children with Koresh.
I was locked up. Koresh came and slapped me around. And
Grace saved her own life by fleeing Mount Carmel just months before the fire. Her sin?
I offered myself to him.
Sexually?
Sexually. You don't go to the prophet comes to you.
Inquisition, death, murder.
1 year on,
We're to a stage where I don't know whether I've got 2 children or not.
Tragically, Peter Gent was dead the entire time they were there, the first to be shot. Nicole and her children all perished in the fire after the FBI tired of waiting. It turned the tanks and choppers on its own people, then later destroyed evidence.
I blame Koresh because he didn't bring the people out. They were not going to come out unless he gave them the okay. The FBI, I think it was badly handled by them. It could have been done another way.
Most of the people we filmed at Mount Carmel died in the fire. There was no eternal life, no beautiful end, just the slaughter of the innocents caught in a battle of wills between the madman of Waco and the US military machine.
Last word on David Koresh and the Waco siege. I think they speak to an underlying paranoia about authoritarianism that is historically well-founded. But don't all the adults involved share some blame, especially the ones who remained in the compound and did nothing for weeks while children's lives were at risk? Is it possible to acknowledge the dangers of government overreach and not to be sympathetic to a man like David Koresh? I say yes.
I'd like to start off first of all with my oldest son. His name is Cyrus. Come sit over here, son. How old are you? 7. Say hello to everybody.
Hi.
Wave at them. The camera right there.
Did Cyrus survive?
Nobody on this tape survived. Later in the tape, he actually brings out the daughter that he, David, had with Steve Schneider's wife.
Come over here.
But Steve's behind the camera filming this whole thing. And we were all just kind of taken back. Finally registered the magnitude of how much control this guy exerted over those people.
And I'm sorry some of you guys got shot. But, hey, God will have to sort that out, won't he?
Moving on to Sun Myung Moon and the Moonies, born Mun Yong Myong. Hopefully I didn't butcher that too bad. Born January 6, 1980, died in 2012, aged 92. And he actually ended up ranking pretty high on this list, according to the criteria that I laid out in the beginning. He did better than I originally projected. So the size, and obviously, yeah, that's strictly because of the size, his recruiting, and his overall influence is the reasons there. So top scores on those, you can see 1 to 2 million. I don't think I have to explain why there. After his death, the cult has been in decline, so not the highest ranking on the longevity. Recruiting, I think that goes without saying. The mass weddings, the relationships with political leaders. Entrapment, as far as this group goes, I gave them closer to the bottom. Not the lowest ranking, but again, members were adults, and because it was such a large group, see, as you can see here, it's reduced now to 100,000. So from possibly 4 million. So just the size of the group, it just makes it that much easier to leave, I think. Moving on, influence, I think I've already covered. Deadliness, obviously, when you have that this big of a group and there's no like actual homicides or deaths or large, suicide pacts, nothing even close to what is on this list. So that's why it gets the number 2 ranking there. A total of 40. So move on here. I created these little graphs here just to kind of give you a visual of where we are at. So after the first 3 matchups, you can see Moon is the surprise winner here. And so let's jump on over here, and I am going to zoom in a little bit. And then come over here. So it ended up being David Koresh over Marshall Applewhite with a score of 39 over 27. That moves him into the matchup with Moon. And Moon, the surprise winner there. And so now we have moved on to our next round 2 matchup between Charles Manson and Shoko Asahara. So let me move over back to the profiles, and I'm going to take a drink of water real quick. Okay.
ヨガの力で治してしまうという。
そうです。
で、ちょっとこれ見てください、この本。
秘密のカリキュラムというこんな本をお出しになられており
こ
ます。
れ浮いてるの浮いてるの。ほら。ね。ヨガの、そしてまた超能力者でございます。朝原翔子さんを今日お迎えしておりますので、いろんなためになるお話を伺っていきたいと思います。拍手でお迎えくださいませ。どうぞ。どうも、こんにちは。こんにちは。まあ、私ね、初めて、お会いさせていただきますけども、写真なんか随分お若いですね。ねえ、なんか初めてのような、初めてじゃないような、なんか親しみのあるね、ですけど。これ本当に浮いてるんですか？
そうですね。
ああ、これ2、3日もこうやって浮いていられるんですか？
いえ、経典にはそう書かれていますけど、そうではないですね、私の場合は。ふわっと浮いて、少しとどまって、またすっと落ちると。そうです、そういう感じですね。
はあ、なるほどね。
All right, sorry, back. So we have Shoko Asahara, and as you can see right off the bat, he is our new frontrunner. Born, I'm not going to try to say that, Matsumoto in 1955, died in 2018 by execution. He was hung by the Japanese government, aged 63, and also 12 other cult members were executed around the same time. I think 5 others on the same day as he was executed. Size, the middle, towards the top, third actually. So 5,000 plus at the peak before the attacks, currently about 1,500, and that is obviously post his Shoko's leadership. So the longevity, I gave him a 5, just because, I mean, he's still kind of at the top a little bit, because they are still active, but they're, one group has disavowed him. They're no longer under government surveillance. And I think I allude to this down below a little bit. So anyway, and you can dispute these if you have different opinions. Feel free to voice those in the comments. I have no problem with anybody who disagrees with my rankings here. But I didn't, maybe I could have put him higher on the list, but I gave him a 5 there. So moving on to recruiting, I did give him the second highest on this one just because he is actually the third largest. But if you look at who he was able to recruit, there were doctors, there were scientists, lawyers, and he did it by using videos and getting a media attention. So he was actually very successful.
で、主人は超能力があるということなんで、はい。なんか超能力を、なんかあれですか、注入することができるんですか？
できますね。先ほど3つの管がありましたね。あれを通して、身体にエネルギーを入れるわけですけども。
そうなりますと、彼女にエネルギーを入れると、彼女はどうなるんですか？
彼女はもちろん超能力者にもなりますし、それから健康になりますね。
座って、おお。
少し待っててやってください。落ち着いてますから。
そうですか。
はい。
目覚めたみたいですよ。
どんな感じですか。
すごい幸せな気持ちですごい満足感があってで肉体とこう自分の意識とか違うところにあった感じがして
すごいですね。これもう大変なエネルギー使いますでしょこれは。
そうですね。一人やると右半身が冷たくなりますから。
かなりだから先生との信頼関係もないとすぐにはできないでしょうね。
そうですね。信頼関係がまず一番にエネルギーを入れてくださいという感じがないとですね。はい。
今日の結論はどういうふうな。
超能力はあなたを変えるですね。
なるほど。超能力があなたを変えるとこういうわけでございますね。今日はどうもいろいろお話ありがとうございました。どうも。
And by the way, he did all this half blind, so I think that's pretty impressive. Obviously, his goals, I don't agree with any of his ideology or any of that, but as far as his recruiting, he was actually pretty successful. Entrapment, also pretty high ranking on the list. One of the members that was executed by the government was convicted of strangling a young cult member in '89, suspected of dissidence. So that should give you a pretty good idea of what was going on in the inner workings of the cult. Influence, I gave them a 7. As I talked about earlier, they split into 2 groups. They are under watch by the government, several governments, but they still exist. They're still around. And they actually, I think there was an attack following I read about it. There was an attack following the execution. They haven't necessarily tied it to Shoko Asahara, but it does seem to be linked. On the deadliness, whoops.
でそういう意味でオウム真理教の教えのまず大前提に来るのは死というのが来ます。でこれをどうするのかという問題になってくるわけですね。で私はビートたけしさんの今までの
Moving on to deadliness for Shoko Asahara, obviously a high ranking, and could have easily been number 1, could have easily even overshadowed Jim Jones in the Jonestown massacre or mass suicide. But luckily their sarin gas attack was not as successful as they wanted it to be. 13 died in the sarin gas attack. As many as 1,000 reported at the time, up to 5,500, even more. I've seen reports up to 5,800. Potential death toll was much higher, as I said, 24 total deaths attributed to the cult activity, including a precursor sarin gas attack, which was practiced for the subway attack. Last word, a bully who was half blind convinced educated people in one of the most advanced countries on earth with a thriving economy to commit mass murder on their fellow citizens. In his media appearances, he talks about his supernatural abilities such as transmitting energy. He seems to refer to death as a tool. He uses flattery on one man when talking about pooping, telling him he must have been a god in a past life because he thinks he's too good to poop like the rest of us. Shoko Asahara, you are a grifter. You are one of the worst of the worst.
影響力を持たれていらっしゃる、要するにカリスマ性ですよね、カリスマ性というのは神から与えられた英知みたいなものですから、そういうことを持っていらっしゃるということは、それをなんていうのかな、特に影響力のある若者たちにいい意味で与えていかれたら、もうそれこそ素晴らしい人生になるんじゃないでしょうかね。
そうですか。But you, sir, are dead, and luckily for us, your earthly mission is over. Moving on to Charles Manson and the family, born Charles Miles Maddox on November 12th, 1934, died November 19th, 2017, aged 83, in prison. So, he's one of the lower rankings for size, up to 100 followers. I did see a report that said that, but basically a small core group. In the end, 5 were sentenced to death, including Manson. That was later modified to life in prison. Longevity? Well, needless to say, he died in prison. But he is the most infamous on the list, received up to 60,000 letters per year while in prison. So I think, like it or not, he's going to be around for a long time. And I think his videos are going to keep him in the spotlight for a long time as well. Next, for recruiting, also one of the lower ranking ones. Obviously, that's going to be correlated to the size. But he does get a high ranking on the entrapment just because of his methods. So he would specifically target attractive young girls, lure them to his community. I believe sex was a big part of it, as was this one person. I copied a quote down here. And these girls would seemingly do anything for this guy. Murder, sex acts, you name it.
On the discovery of these crimes in Southern California, a media circus followed. Banner headlines, normally reserved for the outbreak of war, trumpeted every gruesome detail. America read that Manson led the marauding killers, that he held drug and sex orgies at his makeshift ranch, that he commanded others to kill to prove their love and loyalty to him. At the trial, Manson called himself a child of the system. Some said he had satanic powers.
So he did have a history of learning sales tactics, Freudian psychology. He even studied Scientology briefly. He treated sex as a tool of manipulation, and as often as he would deflower virginal teens, he made sure to always have handsome men in his entourage to keep them under control. While it's easy to look at all the craziness and wonder how anyone would ever follow a crazed madman like Charlie, it's important to note that most of his followers joined the family before the age of 20. Most were from broken homes and were easily manipulated by the much older Charles Manson. So yeah, girls, be aware of that, because it's not the only guy on this list that recruited young women.
Word is, you have turkey in the sky. Word is, I don't know what word is. Somebody else tell you that. I didn't tell you that.
Did you kill Shay?
Hell no.
Did you cut Hinman's ear off?
How'd
How'd that feel when you cut his ear off?
I felt bad about it.
Truth is fun, though. Isn't the truth fun now when you...
Sure.
You cut his ear off. What did it feel like?
Fun? My goodness.
What did it feel like when you cut his ear off? Tell me about it. Come on.
What did it feel like?
Yeah.
Well, I had done what he said for about 20 years. I'd done everything he told me to do. And I got to thinking, now, why don't this guy do something I tell him to do? And he said, no. I said, well, how comes I'm always doing what you tell me to do, but then you never do what I say do? And he said, well, blah, blah, blah. So I said, now you do what I say. And he said, no. I said, you do exactly what I say. And he said, no. I'm telling you. I'm not asking you. I'm telling you. You do exactly what I say. And he said, wow, where'd you get that? I said, I got it from my father in prison. He gave it to me. I had a little charm bracelet I used to carry it on when I was about that big.
So skip that for a second. Yeah. Why was it so important for him to do what you say?
As far as influence and deadliness, he also is pretty high ranking, and that's obviously going to be related to his just infamy, overall infamy. He's probably the most overall infamous on the list, on this list anyway. Even his music has become somewhat popular, and it's been covered by multiple artists. Like I said, his interviews are all over the internet, and those aren't going away anytime soon. As far as deadliness, the group was convicted of 8 brutal murders, suspected of others, so that obviously ranks them pretty high on this list.
Let me interrupt you for a second.
Yeah, well, then we're gone with that thought.
No, because you're getting on
then
the...
Then we'll go to another one, and then you make me look crazy.
No. You can make yourself look crazy, Charles. Okay. I can't make you look crazy, and please believe me.
All right. I'll believe you, and I'll put it in my left-hand pocket for later.
Let me take you back.
I'm brand new. Everything I do is always brand new. I'm on the premise of reality.
Last word on Charlie Manson. He died in prison after spending the majority of his life behind bars.
How long have I been in jail? 34 years? 34 years, so...
out of 47, you've been here 34.
I've been in jail, prison, a long time, all my life. I was raised up in here. So I understand jail, so I understand myself, and I can deal with that. I set my cell, and I do my number, like a convict does his number.
You like jail, don't you?
I don't dislike or like.
Next up is Henry Cristo. Born Alvaro Thace, possibly, in 1948, presently still Jesus. This is the guy I pointed out in the Division 3 video that he would... he's kind of the odd guy out on this list. So obviously he's going to be the lowest ranking on here. So he's got one of the lowest ranking on the size. His longevity is, just because of the small size and influence, it's fairly limited. Recruiting, he did travel worldwide, and he has been traveling since 1979, but I think for all his efforts, I don't think he's really got the message out or convinced too many people. Low score on the entrapment, obviously low score on the influence. He has been featured in Natural Geographic and many other media outlets. He's been quoted as saying, "I can be crazy, but not dumb. Madness is different from dementia. It is the mother of philosophers, prophets, and inventors. My mission is to prepare the elect, the survivors of the inevitable nuclear hecatomb that will culminate in the end of this chaotic world, for the formation of the new earthly society, which will strive to fulfill the Creator's will." Yeah, do you buy that? I don't know. Deadliness is the lowest on this list, and for a total score of 10. Last word, he's definitely second place for the most iconic Jesus lookalike, and I think you will agree with that. So that brings us to the end of the next 3. We have 3 remaining, and as you can see, Shoko Asahara is now the leader on the board. You're starting to see some separation. Manson here, a pretty good score, but as you can see, not quite as high on the list as you might expect. So let's move back over to the bracket, fill this out. So we had Shoko Asahara over Manson. Shoko Asahara easily winning this match over Henry. And the surprisingly competitive Moon the high score there, still not able to overcome Shoko Asahara, and he moves now into the final four, and we now have our final four matchups all set up. So let's now get into these last three contenders, and let's finally see where this tournament ends up and who will be our champion. Okay.
I think my earliest memories are of him being violent towards me and towards other people in the cult. I was kept in the house all the time and I wasn't allowed to go out, so I didn't know anything else. I couldn't bear living like that. I'd rather die and be free.
Moving on now to the final three matchups. Let's just get right into it if I can control my profiles here. So here we are with Aravindan Balakrishnan and his creation he called Jackie. Balakrishnan, aka Comrade Bala, born about 1940 in India, aged around 80 now, as of the recording of this video. Jackie stands for Jehovah, Allah, Christ, Krishna, and Immortal Iswaran. As you can see over here, he is the lowest ranking on overall size, longevity, recruiting, and influence. 7 at the peak, 5 at the time of arrest. He is now in prison for 23 years, and his cult is therefore dissolved. As far as recruiting goes, he targeted the small group of women, including his own daughter, who was born into captivity, and for that reason, he gets the number 9 ranking on entrapment, sexual assault, enslavement, false imprisonment. Beginning in the 1970s, his daughter was born in 1983 and lived as a captive until the age of 30, until her escape in 2013. And that escape spelled the end for this guy.
It was not so much Marxist and Maoist as a cult of Bala as a person. So he took what he thought suited him from that ideology as well as from other things to promote himself, because he's basically a narcissistic psychopath, really, and just wants everybody to worship him and do as he says without question. And he was obsessed about controlling other people. He loved violence and those totalitarian dictatorships and things. He really loved that, because I think he wanted to be like that. He wanted to be like Stalin or Mao or Pol Pot, where everybody just listens to him, and if they don't, then he can kill them with impunity. I mean, when I was a child, I was taught that he knows everything. He's God. He's the ruler of the universe, and everything he says is correct.
I'm saying life in prison for him. As far as influence and deadliness, influence mainly limited to the household. He was involved in politics, thought the UK was a fascist state, but immigrated there and created his own fascist state at his house. He gets the number 5 spot in the deadliness category. Sexual assault, rape, emotional and psychological abuse over decades. Daughter among the rape victims. One woman was physically abused and died after a fall from window. Imprisoned daughter later found out that was her mother. Homicide ruled out in 2 member deaths. So yeah, like I said, they originally started with 7. They were down to 5 at the time of his arrest. And those 2 members died, but they were ruled accidents. Last word on this guy. So this story helps illustrate that this is a human phenomenon. What I mean by that, pointing back to the Jackie creation, which spanned all religions, because it is the warped reality of a faith-based worldview that creates these environments, sheltered from outside contact and influence. While Balakrishnan had dreams of ruling the world, he ended up causing very localized and intense suffering for a very small, unfortunate group. And with that, I'm moving on to Kondraty Selivanov and the Skoptsi sect. It's really hard to say. He died in 1820 from Russia with no love because he was exiled and because they famously castrated themselves. So obviously the top ranking here on the longevity, because despite severe repression by not only the Soviet Union, but also the imperial governments that were the predecessors of the Soviet Union, the group continued to grow for 100 years and even persevered into the 21st century. So even outlasted the Soviet Union. As many as 100,000 members at its peak in the early 20th century. Obviously, their influence dropped significantly following the Soviet Union. But yeah, like I was saying earlier with the recruiting, so numbered at 246 in 1772, over 5,000 in 1866, consistent growth for 100 years, and that obviously changed drastically once the Soviet Union came to power. As far as entrapment, fairly low score because, as with the Heaven's Gate, members were voluntary. In fact, yeah, I would argue they had more incentive to leave than stay. They were ridiculed, they were deported, paraded through the town wearing fool's caps and women's clothes. Some of them fled to Romania. And still the numbers grew. So, yeah, As far as the deadliness, fairly low score also. No like mass suicides or anything. It was mostly the bodily mutilation, which apparently was mostly voluntary, and not a very high percentage of the overall following or the group. Last word, a common theme among religious fundamentalists is the idea of achieving a higher state of being. Most humans, including the religious, think we are superior to other animals. The rejection of evolution is based on this idea. We are made in the image of God, not an ape, right? Well, the skeptics believed that human genitals were a mark of original sin, and that after the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve had the halves of the forbidden fruit grafted onto their bodies, forming testicles and breast. Thus, the removal of these sexual organs restored the Skoptsi to the pristine state before the original sin. It's eerily familiar with Marshall Applewhite's conclusion in the 1990s. And I am honestly at a loss on how to explain this. I suppose it's I don't know. I suppose you could attribute it to narcissism a little bit, just by, like I was pointing out earlier. They believe they're achieving a higher state of being. They believe they're superior in some way. And I think that just that leads into it. But I could be wrong. I'm not a psychologist. Moving on to Krishna Venta, the final contender on this list, and the fountain, born Francis Herman Penkovich, I believe, in 1911, died 1958 in a bombing. So this Jesus was blown up. About the middle of the pack on all of the rankings, middle to the lower end. Estimated about 100 total at the peak. So Krishnaventa, or the wisdom, knowledge, faith, and love fountain of the world, are still talked about, including in this video. The cult is now historical. So fairly low ranking on the longevity. As far as recruiting, he did travel to Europe. Was filmed in England. I'll show you that in a little bit. They did gain some notoriety in the local area because they helped nearby travelers, or even known as first responders to like fires and I believe a plane crash. But overall, the group did not really grow to that large of a size. Entrapment, I gave him a pretty high score, at least on this list. Krishnaventa had a reputation of gambling and sex addiction with the cult members. That does suggest an authoritarian leader mentality. The suicide bombing was carried out by disgruntled members, so I mean, it just kind of gives you an idea, I guess, the grip that he had on the group. If they were willing to go to that level of an extreme just to get back at him or just to take him out. So obviously he's not going to be the top ranking, but to me that puts him above some of the others. As far as influence, I've kind of covered that already. So a couple of interesting side notes, though. A number of his followers would later die in the Jonestown cult suicide and murder, and Manson may have adopted some concepts from the Krishnaventa cult. He did stay there for a short period of time, Charles Manson and his group. But the idea of the race war probably wasn't necessarily a new concept to him. I mean, this was following a period of and leading into a period of the KKK revival. So I don't know, it seems like kind of a common thing at the time, common mindset, I guess. As far as deadliness, at least as far as this list goes, he's not one of the higher ranking ones. 8 killed in suicide bombings, including Krishnaventa. The last word, he's a curious member from history, probably not harmless, and seems to have been a grifter, but not a monster comparable with others on this list. He is, however, the winner of the most iconic Jesus lookalike. I'm sure you would agree. So, with that, that brings us to the end of all the matchups. We've kind of taken a little deeper dive with all of the remaining contenders, and as you can see here, Asahara is the overall winner. Kondrati will win over Krishna, Asahara over Balakrishnan. And let's jump over to the bracket and fill this out just so we can get that feel good closure of seeing Shoko Asahara in the championship square. And there he is. Shoko Asahara takes it. And that concludes the Jesus vs. Jesus tournament. I would like to thank you all for watching. Bye now.
The perpetrators were not common criminals. They were doctors, lawyers, scientists. All were members of the doomsday cult Aum Shinri Kyo, a faith preaching Armageddon. The founder of this religion was Shoko Asahara, a partially blind, middle-aged former yoga instructor. How did Asahara compel well-educated people to commit such an evil act? Born into a poor family in March 1955, Asahara was given the name Chizuo Matsumoto. His father was a craftsman. After Chizuo lost most of his eyesight to infantile glaucoma, his family sent him away to a school for the blind. Because he had somewhat more sight than his more severely disabled classmates, he was able to bully them. He became both feared and followed. The boy loved to read science fiction and claimed he would one day rule a robot kingdom. After school, he applied to a prestigious Tokyo university, but was rejected. While Matsumoto's academic career had come to a close, he would soon flourish as the leader of a religious cult that included highly trained scientists, some of whom set about developing weapons of mass destruction. Chizuo Matsumoto lost most of his eyesight at an early age and spent much of his childhood at a school for the blind in Japan. There he developed the ability to both bully and lead his peers. But when he finished secondary school in 1977, he was not admitted to university. He began practicing acupuncture and teaching yoga. Matsumoto discovered the writings of Nostradamus, the 16th century French astrologer who foretold the end of the world. The young man became obsessed with the idea of Armageddon. He began to have delusions while meditating. In one, he claimed to have been called to become a god of light and directed to create an army to bring about Armageddon. Matsumoto believed that he would survive the apocalypse and emerge as ruler of the world. In 1987, he changed his name to Shoko Asahara and formed a religion called Aum Shinri Kyo, or Supreme Truth. He registered himself as the leader. Asahara attracted new followers using persuasive videos that claimed he possessed godlike powers. He targeted intelligent but lost souls, among them scientists and engineers who were seeking meaning in their lives. He told them that if they followed him, they would find a path to salvation in a new world. But that world could only be created if this one was destroyed. By 1990, Asahara had recruited 5,000 adherents. He ordered some of his scientist followers to develop a wired helmet for new students to wear. Its purpose? To align their brainwaves with Asahara's in order to better understand his thoughts. It was called the PSI, Perfect Salvation Initiation. He also ordered cult members to wear masks of his likeness and, while wearing them, to demonstrate devotion.
As Asahara's disciples continued to worship him as a god, his ego is inflated and his delusions are intensified, ultimately making him even more dangerous.
But Asahara's ultimate goal was the creation of a new world by bringing about Armageddon. His scientist followers were directed to develop weapons of mass destruction. They set up a factory to produce the deadly nerve gas, sarin. The Doomsday Cult was preparing for a massive attack. In 1995, Asahara ordered the release of the deadly sarin into the Tokyo subway. The March 20th attack killed 12 and wounded 1,000. He and his inner circle were arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. Asahara expressed disappointment about the low death toll.
だんだん来年が見えてきたようだな。ここである人物を君に紹介しよう。
アラン・セールスマンの天の声が聞こえましたので参りましょう。はい。
そういうわけで私は会いたかったんですよ本当は。
今日初。
そうなんです。私テレビでよく見ましたですけどね。
はい。そうですか。じゃあ夢のご対面ということで、こんばんは。
同じようなものを作っていただきました。ありがとうございます。
いやなんかキューバしのぎっていう感じが見え隠れして、私だけなんか
誰が見てもこれインチキ臭いですけども。
そうですね。でもなんかこの使った具合が
私に合ってますからいいですけどね。
そうです。
今日はですね楽しみですね。
というたけしさんからのラブコールなんですけれども、朝原さんご自身からご覧になってこの今の宗教ブームって言いますか新宗教ブームとも言われてますけれども、その辺はどのように感じらっしゃるわけですか？
そうですね、来るべきものが来てるんじゃないでしょうか。
来るべきもの。
つまり人間の物質的豊かさというものがピークに達して、でそこでは満足できないと人々が思い出していると。でそうなると次はどうなるかというと内側の世界の探求に入っていくということだと思うんですね。でその時代がやっとやってきてるということじゃないでしょうかね。
で特にその若い人たちが朝原さんのところには随分多くていらっしゃいますよね。その若者が特にその宗教に期待するものっていうのは、
飢えた時代を経験している人たちはやはりその生きるイコール働くイコール豊かな生活というその構図が形成されると思うんですね。しかし若者たちはもう小さい時から豊かですから、でその豊かさのその裏側にある空虚さというもの、これをやはり小さい時から認識してますので、そうなると当然その物質社会以外のいやそれ以上のものをやはり求めようとする。
あとすごいこれ子供の時からずっと今日はねあれ面白いしょうがない。子供の時からずっと悩んでることってあるんですよ。なんで人というものがありますね。我々人間と称するんで、他の生き物なんですけど自分が動くためとか生きるためになんか口に入れて糞にして出さなきゃいけないってこの状態っていうのはどうして変わらないんだろうかっていう気がするんですけどね。それはその原子とか分子レベルになれば何も死んでないとか形は全然変わってないんだって通り過ぎるだけだとは思うんですけど、形のあるものをまた摂取しなきゃいけないとかそういうことで成り上がってる人間というのは心をいくら鍛えてもどうするんだろうかって、その部分に対する対応の仕方っていうか。
いや
急に子供になってしまうんですけど、話は
子供というよりもですねそれもまた仏教の奥義の瞑想の一つで、この肉体を完全に不浄のものと見ると。でこの不浄のものと見てそれを単に否定するんではなくて、その肉体から離脱してもう一つの自分の本質があるわけですけど、その本質というのは先ほど言われたその分子原子レベルの肉体だとお考えください。でそれは食べる必要もないし飲む必要もないと。ただその空間にあるそのエネルギーを吸収することによって素晴らしい経験素晴らしい、心地いい状態になるわけですけど、でそういうことを小さいとか考えていらっしゃるということは明らかに仏教の、ステージでも普賢とか言われる段階があるわけですけど、そういう段階を前世において経験していらっしゃる証拠だと思いますね。それは間違いなく前世において経験していらっしゃるんじゃないでしょうか。でないと普通の人にはそういうことは考えませんね、普通の人はね。
前世は何だったと思いますか？
いやそれは今言いました通り普賢だとするならば当然人間の点から考えたら神と言われる存在があるわけですけど、これは明らかにその 形状界といって、要するにこのうちを創造したとか破壊したとかいう神がいるわけですけど、そういう世界の経験をして初めてこの今の人間の世界におけるその不尿の問題とか、そういう問題をリアルに考えることができるわけですから、そういう世界を少なくとも何回か経験してらっしゃることは間違いない。つまり神の経験をしてらっしゃることは間違いないでしょうね。
だけどもやってるそういう気持ちがすごいあるんだけど、自分のテレビやなんかでいろんなとこ働いてることを考えると何をしてるんだなと思って、それを断ち切ればいいんだろうけどね、断ち切る勝負っていうのがすごい難しいですね。
いや、それはそれでいいんじゃないですかね。というのは最もある意味で大きな影響力を持たれていらっしゃる、要するにカリスマ性ですよね。カリスマ性というのは神から与えられた英知みたいなものですから、そういうことを持っていらっしゃるということは、それはなんていうのかな、特に影響力のある若者たちにいい意味で与えていかれたら、もうそれこそ素晴らしい人生になるんじゃないでしょうかね。
そうですか。
なんかいいな。
そうです。なんか自信が持てたんじゃないですか。
いやいや、また場所を改めてですね、違う機会に朝原さんと対談を申し込んでですね、20時間ぐらいじっくりとですね。
もう朝までとは言わず、もう何日も。
そうですね。
2人だけで朝までトークってやらせてくんねえから。
そうですね。
なんかそれが面白いな。
そうですか。いいお弟子さんになりそうですか。
いや、お弟子さんというか、もともと要素をお持ちですから、私に代わって近江新日教の教祖をやってもらってもいいんじゃないですかね。
教祖として立っていけるこの人は。
明日からピンクの服着て歩いたりして怒られたりして。いや、
というよりも本当ストレスに強いですから、早いんじゃないでしょうかね、経験は。はい。
でもたけしさんの場合はなかなか仕事を辞めてっていうそういう形の落ち方はしないと思うんですけれどね、この人から仕事を取ったら今煩悩の方は別として名目というか一番大事な部分っていうのは私は仕事だと思うんですけど、どうでしょうね。ほとんど抜け殻のようになってしまうんじゃないかと思うんですけど。
ただ私はたけしさんの小さい時からの経験を聞いてますと、ある時ポッと仕事を放られるんじゃないかという気がしますけどね。
そうですか。
これは仏典にもよくあるパターンですから、これ最高の悟りを開くっていう人が言う場合は必ず現世的に優れてる人でなきゃダメなんですね。その理由というのは先ほど言った試作をする力、考える力が鋭くないと悟れないんですね。ですから可能性として私は今から何年か後には。
いや、僕はね、ちょっと勘としてはね、5年後に自殺するかやめちゃうかどっちかだと思ってるんですよ。
そうですか。
くたばるか自分でね。
5年、ずいぶん早いスタンスですね。
言ってずっとこのとこ何年も言ってるけど、もう5年になってきちゃった。あと7年6年って言ったら5年だよ、49だと思ってるけど。でこれで仕事をほっぽり投げるか死んじゃうかね、自分でどっちかだと思ってるんですよ。意外に後で5年ぐらいしたら分かりますか。
そうですね。ただビートたけしさんは私は5年じゃ死なないと思いますよ。
5年じゃ死なない。
And before I leave, I just want to say I really appreciate it if you guys have made it this far. Welcome for any new subs out there. And yeah, for lasting this long, you guys are amazing, and I love everything that you're doing. I'm sure you've probably never asked yourself, is it necessary to put all the people in history who have claimed to be Jesus in a March Madness single elimination bracket to determine who, besides Jesus, is the ultimate Jesus? But if that thought had occurred to you, I'm sure you would have immediately thought, no, it's not necessary. But we're going to do it anyway. It may shock you that there are enough Jesuses to fill a bracket of 64, but there are, and that's what we're doing. Although not based on love, or caring for the poor and sick. No, this will be judged on infamy, power, influence, debauchery, and most insane. And just to be clear, I am going to have fun with this, but I don't want you to think I'm making fun of mental illness or making light of the tragedies that some of these people helped cause. I do hope to shed some light on the sheer magnitude of the phenomenon and help put it into perspective. I have a feeling you will find, like I did, it is way more common than you ever thought. If you're enjoying this content, consider subscribing, leave a comment and a like, which I will be sure to love, and let me know how I'm doing, or how you're doing, or your thoughts on something else. And keep in mind, this is only the Jesus category. There are Buddhas and Jewish messiahs and Islamic prophets and divine rulers, and some in a category all their own. I'll be reviewing the spreadsheet I'm working out of in more detail in later videos as well, so be sure to subscribe for more. Bye now!